all the way back, baby.
Yeah, and if we say book your hotel, you book your hotel. But my lord, I have soiled myself.
What do you mean by live? Genuine live? Hello, radio!
And now, another episode of The Way We HNC. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know what time it is where you are, but it is flag football time here on The Way We HNC It. My name is Jed. I am the humble host of this podcast and the adventure that we're about to take on together. Thank you, everyone who reached out and enjoyed the jazzy new intro. Tonight, there is no Mr. Stuart Tree Anderson. Tonight, there was almost a Greg Sim. The beacons were lit, the beacons were acknowledged, but we were let down by a rural internet connection. So we're going to try and work on that again for the future. So instead, I am joined by a returning friend of the show, a man who loves what many people hate, the host and creator of An Anatomy of a Call, international referee, Jed Llewellyn Brookes. Woohoo! Yeah, bro! Yeah.
Hello. Fantastic to be here, even if I am a little sad that my mention in the intro has disappeared with the shiny new one, but we will get it.
It has. It was unfortunate. It felt like it was maybe due a change. A change we've been meaning to make. I actually meant to make the change at the start of kind of what we would call the new series, which, if I check on Spotify, was 22 episodes ago. So hey, better late than never. And yeah, I'd considered adding some comms from playoffs this year, but I mean that's not going to happen. So
Probably best avoid.
Probably not going to use that audio ever again. So yeah, here we are, and welcome back. It's been a while since.
As it's been 3.5 years when I thought about it earlier today, which is a very long time, and a lot has happened in that kind of intervening period.
Yeah, your last appearance, I believe, came after the great form filling of the turn of the decade.
Well, at our last appearance, I was fully preparing myself mentally for going to officiate at the 2021 Worlds, and then we all know what kind of happened there. Which is old ground that has been talked about lots and lots and lots, so we're not here to tread over.
Won't rehash that one, but
no, I did still get to go as and do off-field stuff, but it wasn't quite the same as being able to do the on-field stuff that I obviously love. So it was still an experience, but perhaps not quite the same one that you would have normally got.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of the world is a very different place now, and we're going to talk about it from a kind of officiating standpoint. But first off, we will do a very quick look at the news. Greg with the news. So our top story tonight is, as we said, Greg's not here. I was really excited for Greg to read that to you all. So yeah, keep the beacons coming, and yeah, we'll talk to his internet provider. The real news is BAFA registration is open. The dates for next season are out there for you to take a look at. You can go and look at our Facebook and Instagram page. Thank you to all that pointed out the typo that I made when reading the BAFA announcement. As much as Tuesday and Wednesday night football, I think it would be appreciated. Obviously, that is not the case. So apologies for that one. But hey, I was just making sure that the people were paying attention. So yeah, thank you for doing that. So yeah, make sure that your team admins are ready for March, because it's not going to be long before we start having to do schedule releases and all sorts. So division alignments and league calls and whatever. We'll be back into the thick of it very, very soon. Is that something that, like, rocks your world when you see like the dates for next year come out, Jed? Like,
I think from an officiating standpoint, I'm most interested in when the finals sort of weekend is, because that's when I have to make a very groveling kind of appearance in front of my dear wife and tell her that for this weekend, I will be disappearing for 2 whole days to Manchester. So that's the most important one for me, that kind of gets locked into the calendar as early as possible, so that I don't have to surprise anyone while I disappear.
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I normally, yeah. It's like for us, it's like if we're gonna qualify, I would prefer my team to qualify early, because it's a long way and trains are expensive. So like the better we perform, the less money I have to spend. So, yeah, so that's open D1 as usual, kicking off a week early in March. So the first, unless I totally misread this, the first D1, the Division 1 kickoff will be the weekend before the Women's National Championships. So March is going to be pretty exciting. It's going to be a lot of football happening before we get into the summer, and of course another round of Euros, the World Games for the women's side. The flag football train never ever stops. And on that, over to our kind of second news item: the GB Silvers took part in a tournament recently in Spain, in Cambril. Cambril, is that how you say it? Spanish is not Cambrils. I don't know. I'm not even going to try an accent. I've learned, but yeah, Spain. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing location. The Club World Championship. The word club doesn't seem to have been too stringently applied for the teams that were on the list. But hey, that's, we take who you can get. So yeah, the Silvers went over.
A rival tournament for Champions Bowl as well, really, this.
Potentially. So the last one was in Colombia, which was a couple of years ago, which was pretty cool. Obviously over to Spain. This time Silvers they were excellent, to be honest. They went really well. 7th overall. But they also managed to beat the Panamanian team, the Windmakers, who were finished 5th, I think. Flag and New Year champions, Bold City College, they were in the top 4 as well. A lot of teams that we're familiar with were there. Sphinx de Po, kind of excellent French side that we all know.
Sphinx and Munich were both there, who weren't at Champions Bowl this year as well, which is why it's kind of interesting to see who chose
where.
Champions Bowl and who chose that as their kind of big tournament, though, because there were some sort of there were no French teams, I think, this year at Champions Bowl, and no Spanish teams either. So there were some sort of notable absences there that perhaps kind of popped up here instead.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah, Sphinx de Po, champions, excellent side, like we know they are. So yeah, good for the Silvers. Kind of interesting format. 20-minute rolling clock for the first half. IFAF rules for the second half, but only one timeout. So negotiate that one in your brain. So yeah, enjoy that. But good for the Silvers, because generally speaking, I don't think the Silvers have played in a kind of IFAF rules tournament, as far as I can think. So really good development for the program there as they move on. And shout out to kind of one of our HNC stalwarts, and anyone that's got him on Instagram will know that as we sit here recording, Matty Ross of the Grangemouth Broncos and the GB setup is currently travelling off to Australia. He got the coaches player of the tournament, kind of for his on and off field work in Spain. So we wish him well in Australia, and yeah, well, hopefully see him again soon. But yeah, GB Lions, another solid tournament for them in the development squad. as they move on. And our third item on the news over in Scoff Corner is there is one spot remaining at Flagging New Year next January, in like 2 months' time. So if you fancy a trip to Motherwell in the dark, then this is the tournament for you. I do joke, but it is a cracking venue. It's always a cracking tournament. So yeah, that's available. And also, interestingly, I'm not sure if it will be at Motherwell because it is going to be in July. Team Scotland, obviously last year went over to Trieste for kind of a youth team tour, little tournament over there with youth teams from Italy and Slovenia. So in July they will be hosting one. I think we've also already got a couple of teams from the YFFL signed up. It seems like there's a couple of Dutch teams that are going to come over. So if it all goes to plan, there will be a mirror tournament next year in the Netherlands. So youth football going pretty well. So yeah,
Kids playing
congratulations.
high-level football is what we want to see, isn't it?
It is what we want to see. It'll retire me much faster, which is all good. And there are also later this week, Goff are going to be looking for some kind of extra kind of positions, kind of to join the. It's not really a committee, but there's some formal rules coming out of Scoff. So keep an eye on them on our social media, on Scoff social media for them if you would like to get involved with all the kind of great work that Scoff is doing. And that is the quick rundown of the news. When we do weekly shows, there's much less news than when we save it all up after taking like a month off.
Well delivered, though, I think.
So
we
my monologuing, I hate doing it, but yeah, so we'll see. But yes, obviously we are going to continue the interview series that we have been kind of running. Obviously, Jed is here with me tonight to talk about all of the good things that have been kind of going on.
blossoming from
Blossoming.
Yeah, it is. It would be the way that I would probably put it. And I think it's been what 3 months. 3 months since the World Championships, and there's so much that kind of happened over the course of that, and there's so much that's coming out of that, and there's so much to look forward to coming into next year. You mentioned we've got Euros, we've got a World Games, and all of this stuff is so exciting, both for the players, but for us as an officiating kind of group as well. A lot of challenges kind of coming up from that, and it's sort of it's a really exciting, and it sounds like a cliche, but it's a really exciting time to kind of be involved in the process of where we are right now with everything, and hopefully helping kind of drive that forward in a really kind of positive sort of way.
So yeah, okay, let's do, because we've spoken a lot on the show before about the cycle that we're in, and last year's Euros, World Games, World Championships, World Games, Euros, World Championships, World Games, Euros, and then the big one. So let's go back to like this time last year, or maybe kind of January of this year. Let's just do it calendar year, right? Because it's November now. So let's do calendar year.
In fact, it might even be worth sort of talking about last year, because it was, I sort of briefly kind of alluded to it when on the intro. Last year was the first time that we got to do an international tournament or I got to be on the field in an international tournament since 2019. Obviously we had COVID in 2020. Then we had the Worlds in 2021. Various different things played out. We had a World Games in 2022 that had a very kind of closed off kind of process for officials. So last year at the Euros was the first time in nearly 4 years that I got the chance to get on the field and actually officiate kind of international flag, which for something that's been such a massive part of my life for nearly a decade was a very, very long time to not get to do that. So it was interesting to have that kind of delay, and it felt like getting on the field there. It felt like I was home, because it was something that I had missed so much from my life, and I'd got to go, sort of in the intervening kind of period. I'd got to go to the likes of your big bowls, your championships, champions bowls, and whatnot, but nothing quite feels the same, and there isn't quite that same sort of electricity in the air as there is of when you actually are on the field at one of these IFAF tournaments and you're locked in the way that you are for one of those versus sort of international club tournaments that I do as well.
Okay, Limerick.
Long time ago now, but
When we spoke to the women's team when they came on, and that we've had the coaches from both teams, we've had the boys on as well. Basically, all of them have said in the build-up, like, I just want game one. Like, I just want the whistle. Like, I just need the build-up to be over, because obviously, in the same boat as you, from like a playing perspective,
it's exactly the same.
It's been 4 years, right? Like, I just want it. Like, I'm so bored of the build-up. I just need to be on the pitch, and then contrasting that afterwards, they're just like, yeah, relief. Like, game one is just like, it just happens, and it's like, oh, play flag. Like, once the whistle goes, you're locked in. It's flag. But is that the same? Like, because you're the one blowing the whistle, right? So
yeah, no, it was exactly the same, and I think going into that tournament in Limerick was, it felt almost like when I went to my first international tournament in 2015, the kind of anticipation, the nerves, the build up around it was just, it'd been so long, and it just felt so kind of almost not alien, but like just different to be out there now and being able to do it. Yeah, it was the way I've listened to the kind of episodes where people have been on here and talked about their experiences with it, and it's funny how similar it is what we have with officiating with what they go through as players as well. It's exactly the same emotions, it's exactly the same feelings. People don't necessarily think that officials go through that kind of same kind of thought processes and reactions, but it's exactly the same for us as it is for any of the players. We have those same nerves, we have that kind of same excitement, that buzz. We get exactly the same thing that all the the guys and girls out playing it as well have us.
Yeah. So yeah, it's funny that, isn't it? Like, you sometimes you're almost invisible, right, when you've got the stripes on.
Oh yeah, exactly.
So we come to January, and it's World's Year. They're in Europe. You know by January that you're going, right? Like,
No.
No.
So I found out I was going in May, I think.
okay.
So it's always a bit weird.
What? Yes. Okay. So how does it work? How
So
does one be selected by the federation?
So the process kind of involves and the process is changing as well, because as we kind of in my first ever tournament, it was literally a group of officials who were hand selected from around. My first tournament was the 2015 European Championships in Spain, and the group of officials we had there was just handpicked from across Europe by the supervisors of officials for the tournament. They picked people who they thought would be the best officials for that. And they had a similar kind of criteria for the 2016 World Championships that were meant to be in the Bahamas and ended up in Miami. And then sort of from 2017, 2018 kind of onwards, it changed this format of, for each team that a governing body sends to a championship, they take one official with them. So if you are sending a men's and a women's team, you send two officials. If you're just sending a men's, you send one official. And what we then had as a process was each federation had to submit a list of think it was 4 or 5 officials for however many slots they had based on the number of teams they were entering. And then IFAF kind of, based on these official CVs, selected the officials from that pool as to who they were going to take. So our kind of names went in, and then, I think it's always, I don't know quite how to describe this without sounding like a little bit kind of arrogant, and I don't mean it to sound arrogant in the slightest, but I know that I am of a certain standard, and I almost have an expectation that I should go. Obviously, that's not a definite, and I never take any of this kind of for granted. But I do go in with my own personal expectation that I should be going to that. I know that I'm good enough to be going to that. So there's always a slightly kind of nervy period between your name going in and the final
email.
announcement. Yeah, and getting that email. And
I knew it would be an email. Of course, it would be an email.
yeah, it was an email. And I found out I was going kind of Mayish. Started booking flights, doing preparation calls, all this kind of admin kind of stuff. But it's still, that 3 month, April, May, June, July, sort of 3 month period between finding out and going, just felt like it went so slowly. I just wanted it to be there, because it was just something that was like circled in my diary and ready to like go, and it just working towards it was just such a challenge.
So what's it like? Like, what are you doing in the, like, because I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, like, you're not just like reading the rule book so you can quote it. Like, what does June and July look like? Like the immediacy of like the immediate 8 weeks before you fly.
Yeah, so luckily, and so, sort of challenge we've kind of had with previous sort of tournaments is that we haven't really had any preparation time as a group. We get thrown in there. We maybe get an hour, 2 hours in a meeting room the day before the tournament starts, which is nowhere near enough time for a group of people all over Europe. If it was the Europe for the Euros the year before, for a Worlds from all over the world, that is nowhere near enough time for us to be able to kind of start to gel a little bit and start to develop some consistency with how we officiate things. We were really, really lucky for the Worlds this year in that we had, I think it was 5 or 6 calls scheduled in. Each of these was about an hour and a half, 2 hours, where we would get together and we'd talk about specific fouls, how we wanted them called. We'd talk about specific mechanics, how we wanted people to move, just so that we could kind of drive as much consistency between us as a group once we got there, because you kind of it's difficult. You don't get, and it's the same for players to a certain extent, but I think if for example you look at you're a team and you look at your game, and perhaps you have a game against a significantly lower seed as your first kind of game, you can kind of say that as like, that's let's get our eye in, we know what the result should be, let's get ourselves warmed up a little bit. You don't perhaps get that in the same way with officiating, because you are expected to be at 100% straight away every kind of call. I think my second game of the tournament, jumping ahead a little bit now, my second game of the tournament was Italy against Canada men, which was 34-33.
It was so good. It was so good.
Fantastic, absolutely fantastic game. But going into that, still quite cold, is an absolutely terrifying kind of prospect. We were quite lucky in that we got these 5 or 6 calls where we got to sit as a group and we got to talk with each other. Having been around sort of the scene a reasonable amount of time, I know a lot of the people on there now, and some of my closest friends are people that I officiate at the international level with, so there was already a certain amount of familiarity with that, and a lot of us kind of know what the line is for certain fouls, how we should be calling stuff, how we should be reacting to kind of certain situations. But it was good to kind of see new faces on this and kind of get them involved and get everyone to that hopefully kind of similar standard, so that the product that we kind of delivered for the players, for the coaches, for the fans watching there, for the fans like you watching 6 streams at once or whatever, making sure that the officiating product that we delivered for you guys was as good as possible.
So I'll just pick some things because that was an excellent answer, and there's questions firing in my brain. You were talking there about the calls beforehand, and obviously both for the Euros and kind of the world as well. Admittedly, this may be completely false, but like, how many languages do you speak,
So
and how do you handle that? Because
yeah, I mean, this is
I don't know that many people from Europe that can
yeah,
speak like Malaysian.
yeah. I mean, this is the challenge that we kind of, and this is where I can feel very, very lucky in that we do all of this in English, and it's just expected it to be the English. It blows my mind that I officiate with people who are doing this in a complete second language for them and who are as fluent as I am, in that in how they talk about football and all that kind of stuff. So it is, I'm very lucky in the sense that we just deliver it all in English. Now, I speak a little bit of Spanish. I speak funny story from the 2023 Euros was, as well as doing the officiating, I was also kind of helping giving some feedback to officials. So when I had games off, I was watching them, and there was an official from Spain, and she didn't speak a huge amount of English. She's an all right official, but it's fair enough. Not everyone is going to be fluent. And I think I worked out that my A level in Spanish was probably of a similar standard to her English. So while I was sat watching her, I was there half watching the game, half with a Spanish dictionary while I was writing my notes in Spanish to deliver to her after the game. And what you do learn is that you can just presume a certain amount of it is just going to be English words with a bit of an accent on it. So, I wasn't sure if flag was going to be what the actual Spanish word for flag is, or if it was just going to be flag. So I just went for L flag, which seemed to get the message across. But, it was so... It is...
That might be the most British thing I've ever heard anyone say on this podcast. I just went for L flag, seemed to work.
And this is why I say that I'm so lucky that we use English as a base language, because, these people are there doing it in something that they don't necessarily speak exceptionally well, and they have to just make it work. So, that is one of the challenges that we kind of face coming into these tournaments as well, is how do you kind of get that to work? Now, I was very lucky with the crew that I worked with at the World Championships. I had a guy from New Zealand, so obviously, English is the first language. And then I had an official from Poland and an official from Czechia who both spoke absolutely perfect English. There was never any point within my entire tournament where language was an issue for us, which was very, very lucky. I know,
amazing. Like, as genuinely, like, yeah, amazing.
Yeah, and that's not a ubiquitous experience, because there are people who perhaps don't speak as much English, and it just does add like
just an extra layer of brain power.
An extra layer, yeah, exactly, and it's not meant as a criticism to anyone. Of course it isn't, because that would be a very British, as he just said, a very kind of British sort of cliche to just expect everyone to speak English. But it does add can add a sort of a layer of complexity to kind of officiating that perhaps you don't necessarily. And that's one of the challenges of working internationally as well. It's not something you encounter when you officiate at home, where you can just talk and that the person who you're talking to is going to hopefully sort of understand what you're trying to say. But it's exactly the same with not just dealing with other officials, it's dealing with teams, players, coaches, whatever. Again, one of my favorite kind of stories from the Worlds was I do speak a little bit of Serbo-Croat, having studied at university for a year. I think within Europe, there's probably a line you can draw across Europe, and anyone above this who lives north of this line, if you speak English to them, if you speak their language to them, they'll just switch to English because they know you can't speak their language as well as them. So, if you talk to Germans in German, they'll go, it's easier if we talk English to you. Or anyone from Scandinavia, the Dutch. There's once you get sort of south of this line, and we'll exclude France completely because they'll just look
Big.
down on you. Yeah, but
It's big.
if you look at places like Spain or whatever, or Serbia, I was officiating Serbia as the example. If you speak even the smallest amount of their language at them, they will absolutely love you for trying. So I immediately got myself, when I officiated Serbia, got myself into the good books with them for being able to do an equipment check in Serbian.
In Serbian. Amazing.
And they were suitably impressed by that, and were sort of, it just set things off on a nice foot. So it is beneficial just to have a few words in as many languages as possible, because it does just make our lives slightly smoother, and they see you as more of a person, and it just kind of makes things just flow a little nicer.
Yeah. The other one I was going to ask was, you mentioned that you're having calls and you're talking about like how fouls are called and what you want to call a certain foul for. Is flag at the point where it has, and obviously like for those that don't know, you officiate rugby as well. Like rugby is, especially at the kind of higher level, rugby seems to go through this never-ending cycle of points of emphasis. Is like flag at a point where there's like certain fouls that are maybe there's like a new interpretation of in the rules, and you guys are trying to like frame that
I mean, yeah,
in tournament, or is it just like there's people all over the world, so like we need to all agree on what pass interference is?
well,
Because
I think the challenge that we have with flag is that, whereas with perhaps we mentioned rugby, soccer as well, there's one dominant rule set, isn't there? I mean, like,
yeah,
the World Rugby have their laws, FIFA have their laws. IFAF, while being pretty big, isn't the be all and end all of flag rules around the world. And especially when you get to
States.
kind of North Americans, there is a certain, they have all sorts of different rule sets being used there. What they're using in kind of, I think Mexico is pretty much all IFAF, so it's a little bit easier there. But then you get places like Panama and whatnot. It can all be kind of slightly different. And the purpose of those kind of calls is to really just get us all kind of on the same sort of page. I think that one of the major things that we kind of had to consider this year was the fact, and this is going to become more and more prominent as we get closer and closer to 2028, is the fact that the game at this highest level is a product, and it needs to be a balance of sticking to the rules and making sure that the rules are enforced properly, while also creating something that is entertaining for a viewer. And that's something that, having
So
been
does that mean
involved,
if you break the rules but it looks sick, it's okay? Is that what we're saying?
I think that
Just
is.
so I can really quote you on this, I can put it on the.
I'm not going to give you any like easily isolatable kind of tidbits here, but it is
Jed
something.
said.
Jed said, if it looks good, then do what you want. But no, it is something that you have to kind of consider, and it's something that rugby goes through at the moment. Endless to red card rules and television match officials and whatnot, and being able to create something that is both fair and is also an entertaining product for the viewers. I mean, to be fair, it should be anyway, because as a player, no one really even if you're getting all the calls in your favor, no one really enjoys a game that is constantly being broken up with flags and stoppages and all that kind of stuff. So, we, having been involved somewhat in the past with the process of sort of developing those rules, that is something that we kind of have to consider, is making it something that's enjoyable and entertaining for participants and spectators alike.
So your 8 weeks are up. You fly to Helsinki. You go up to Lahti. You look at the lake. You see your accommodation. It's amazing. It's glorious.
Well, we got stuck in whereas all
You were in Lahti.
yeah, that was the one downside. It was us and I think 3 other teams were in Lahti itself, as opposed to being
At the venue.
at the venue. And that, the tournament was absolutely fantastically organised, and the venue was beautiful. And that was the one thing that perhaps could have been better from a personal perspective. I totally and utterly appreciate that they can't just magic up new accommodation on the venue, you know. So like, it's not like
Yeah.
that's criticism of them, but just from a sort of personal kind of experience sort of standpoint, is that would have been the one thing to make it just
Yeah,
that
to be
tiny little bit
encamped
better.
at Puyallup.
Would have been being able to kind of, you know, walk from my accommodation to the games, or, you know, if I wanted to shower immediately after a game, I could go back to my own room, or, you know, whatever, to do that. So that was the only like one minor niggle that I had about the. Other than that, it was absolutely superb.
So obviously you're an official, and everyone knows that, and everyone knows what you do on the pitch. But you obviously had stuff to do between games in the mornings and the evenings. Like, so what was your day? Like, what else are you doing that people maybe don't see kind of behind the
Yeah,
curtain of
so
it?
I mean, we got there. We had meetings on the day before the tournament started. We had, you know, alongside the calls that we had done in preparation, we had a few hours together as a group. What was good about that is it was actually an opportunity to kind of meet people. We'd found out our kind of crews and our schedules about a week before the tournament had started. So we'd already kind of had like little WhatsApp groups for each of the crews to kind of just talk to each other and get to know each other a little bit. But it was nice to actually have that kind of time to meet face to face, have some lunch together, just kind of start bonding a little bit there, because it's always challenging to come into that kind of environment. You never know, you know, especially when it's people that you perhaps have never worked with before, which was the case for me. You know, the three people in my crew, I had never actually officiated with any of them before. So you're always coming in with a little bit of nerves about that, you know, about how are we going to work together. So it's nice to have some time just to kind of talk to each other, start getting on the same sort of page. So that was the sort of day before the tournament. We had those meetings to spend some time with each other. Day one, you know, it was just a case of we get there. You know, there was, especially because we were getting the buses from the venue, it wasn't like we could just. I felt if we had the first game off, we could relax. You know, we had to be at the venue, and then it was a case of getting prepped. There's so much kind of stuff, and one of the things that I personally have started thinking more and more about is my sort of physical preparation and mental preparation as well, but especially from a physical kind of perspective. These tournaments are hard work for, if you're doing 5 games in a day. Now, and I appreciate there is a massive difference between playing and officiating in terms of the physical kind of impact you've got. You know, playing is significantly harder, but you know, the teams are playing 2, at most 3 games in a day. You know, we're doing 5, on off, on off, on off, and you don't get that time, you know, of like a 2-hour, 3-hour block just to kind of mentally reset and, you know, physically rest as well. So one thing that I kind of went into this tournament with a big kind of emphasis on was making sure that I felt good before every game that I was officiating, making sure that I had a proper warm up, making sure that I stretched, just so that I was going to, you know, survive basically and kind of get through it. You know, because it is, you know, you get to day 3, game 4, and those legs start sort of going a little bit. But the problem is, the further you get into the tournament, the more important those games are getting as well. So,
Yeah,
you
right.
know, that's you feel your best maybe, you know, your second game, third game of day 1, when you've got your eye in a little bit mentally, the body is still functioning completely, and you kind of wish, if there was a final, I'd want it to be played right now, because this is when I feel like in my absolute kind of best state to do that. Not after, you know, 3-4 days of competition when everything's starting to ache slightly, and then you have to be like, right now I deliver it. So, yeah, off the field, there was the physical stuff. There was stretching, lots of foam rolling, which somehow I managed to fit into my suitcase. I think I sacrificed some clothes to take a foam roller with me. But then, you know, then it was a case of doing the games. After each of those games, trying to just have some time with the group, you know, with the crew, just kind of discuss how things went, what we thought went really, really well, what we wanted to try and improve into the next game, and just kind of trying to build that and build that and build that as we went through it.
So, yeah. So obviously, yes. How many games in total did you
Funnily enough, I was just looking at, so I worked in total 15, 16, 17, 18. I worked 20 games over 4 days.
Over the 4 days.
Yeah.
Obviously, culminating in the stadium
Yeah.
on the Friday night, which looked pretty sick. I'll be honest.
It was something that, I think I remember Liam talking about, I think it was when I listened to one of the previous sort of episodes about how it looked like so professional, and it just felt so much like, and I've used the expression like a real sport, as though flag isn't a real sport anyway, but like, you kind of understand what I mean, like in terms of production values. It looked like something, when I was back home, I showed it to, some people I work with, and I didn't show them the games I showed them the final, because that looks like fully professional kind of sport. It had the graphics, it had the commentators, it had the stadium. It looked absolutely amazing, and it was genuinely such a buzz. The stadium was, the crowd was good. I think probably it was during the best out of the 4 medal games. I think it was best during the Austria-Japan bronze medal game.
That was nuts. That was absolutely
crazy. And you could feel, and luckily, I had some time before the women's final started, which was obviously the last game. So I got to spend a little bit of time in the stands for that, and it was fantastic to watch. I was a bit of a nervous wreck at this point, so it was kind of hard to sort of enjoy it too much. But it was it was a really good game. But in general, the whole sort of stadium experience was absolutely fantastic, and being able to watch back the games as well. Like, I was traveling back the next day, and everything had been streamed so well, and I could sit on the I was sat on the bus back to the airport watching my game back, and just kind of being able to relive that a little bit, because when you're out on the field, and I think it's probably the same for when you play as well, you don't really, it's such a blur. And it was exactly the same for me for that final. Everything, and that final is easily the best work game that I've ever had in my life. Like, no questions about it. That game, from an officiating perspective, was as close to perfection from an officiating standpoint as you can get. Everything just worked. The people I was working with for that game, we were all at a really good level and a really high level, and we all understood what we all wanted to achieve, and we all just did our jobs, and it just felt like clockwork, the entire thing. It was liquid officiating, you know what I mean? And it felt like such a blur. Like, I came off the field at the end of it, and I didn't really know what had just happened. Like, it felt like the game started and then it was over. And I was sat watching the game on the bus to the airport the following day, and there was a couple of calls in this game. I think one of them was on the US's second touchdown, one of them was on Mexico's first touchdown, and I called them at the time, and they felt like really kind of regulation call, and it was all like, did she step out of bounds just before she scored? Was she inbounds when the ball broke the plane? Down the line. Yeah, and at the time, they both felt like really regulation calls. It felt smooth. I thought, I know exactly that. Yes, 100%, that was a score. Arms up, yada yada yada. And it was only when I was watching it back the following day, and I know the way we HNC it rules, you get one swear, so I'm going to use one swear. It was watching it back the next day, and I thought to myself, fuck me, those were really, really close calls. And at the time, they felt so easy to make because everything was going so well for us as a crew. But then you look it back and you think, geez, that was so close. Like, and it felt, I remember, I was thinking about it at the time. It felt like she was, easily a foot away from the sideline. Her foot was nowhere near going down. And you look it back and you're thinking, that's 6 inches there. That is like, if that. So it was a really good, experience. And, the fact that it went so well and that it ended on such a high point for us was absolutely fantastic. I honestly came back from that tournament, coming back from that game, just was on top of the world. Like, it could not have gone better for us as a crew. I think we didn't stand in the way. No one would have talked about the officiating at the end of that game. There was nothing in it that could have, created any issues. So it was, as close to, and I'm not saying it was the perfect game. You will never have the perfect game, but as close as you can get to that perfect game was that women's final.
Yeah, I guess that's like half the battle for you guys, right? It's like if no one mentions you on Facebook the next day,
Yeah,
then like
honestly, yeah, absolutely.
then solid. Like, yeah, I mean that stadium was just looking back at some of like Andy's photos, and it's an opinion I've expressed before that semi-finals are often better than finals, and in the same, like from a spectator's perspective, the two bronze medal matches were up there with some of the most incredible flag football I've ever seen.
Well, absolutely.
Like 41-35 Switzerland over Mexico. Like
Crazy game.
no one had that.
Absolutely
No one
crazy.
had that on their betting slip. Like no one had that in
No,
advance. No one put that down. And then yeah, we mentioned it last week with the IFAF rankings. Japan third in the world. There was a lot of chat about how the Asian teams were ranked after their continental
yeah,
games. Some probably deserved, some maybe not deserved, but yeah, the Japanese women's team can feel
yeah. It was funny because
absolutely vindicated by.
we shared a bus with them on the way back from the stadium. A group of the officials, and they came on the bus and we gave them a round of applause because those girls deserved it. The heart they showed, along with the kind of the sort of skill set that they had and the kind of offense that they run, it's just so interesting. And obviously we don't have favorite teams, but like it's really, really, really hard to dislike that Japanese team, because it is such a, they're just, yeah, they were a joy to watch, and it was fantastic to see them sort of justify their place in those rankings a little bit with that game against Austria.
Yeah, USA men in the final. It
It
was
was
over
what
at
it is.
halftime.
Yeah, it was.
Sorry, Austria, but it was.
Yeah.
What are like? I know that you didn't do this game, but like, what are they like to watch from? Like, did you do one of their games? Like, what are
Yes,
they?
yes.
Yeah. So, what are they like to watch when you're on the pitch with them?
It's a challenge because that everything goes at 1,000 miles per hour. I didn't referee. I worked as field judge for the USA game that I did, and I knew that my primary responsibility is getting to the midline or the goal line, and there was no like exactly go every snap. It's just like just go, just sprint, and like try and get there because everything just happens so quickly and so smoothly for them. It was funny though, talking about them. It's a little bit weird because especially given the way the sport is now, these kind of players have a little bit of mystique around them, aura around them. People like Hoosh Desset, for the men. It was funny because I was refereeing the Mexican women against Canada. And one of the things that I do when I referee is that I always go and ask the quarterbacks their names because it's so much easier to talk to people. If I want to talk to them about something that's happened, it's much, much easier to use someone's name, and someone's far more likely to listen to you
Then like
when you
you're
use it.
four. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
as opposed to 4 or whatever. And I went up to Diana Flores, and everyone knows who she is. Like I know her name, and I've never met her before. And I kind of went up to her and I said, "Look, I know you're Diana. Are you okay if I call you Diana if I want to talk to you during the game?" And even at that point, felt a little bit kind of almost starstruck because this is someone who is a legitimate celebrity.
Yeah.
Like NFL ambassador appearing on all this kind of in commercials and all
Super
this
Bowl
kind of
ads
stuff.
and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I was a little bit kind of not in awe, but it was like a little bit strange that I was kind of talking to her, and it's like, are you okay if I know who you are? Like, are you okay
Yeah.
if
Do
I
you mind if I
call
say
you
it
by?
out loud?
Yeah, but absolutely lovely lady, and as it turned out, she was a joy to officiate. But it was it was a little bit kind of weird with these players with the profile that they kind of have, and that's only going to grow actually officiating them as well.
We were in our kind of prep group chat for the coverage. There was a lot, the USA teams beforehand were a lot in the build up to the Worlds. A lot of NFL players started being like, "Oh, I'll play the Olympics," and a lot of the flag players were like, "Will you?" And
I mean,
we had this, and I don't want to get into that right now. But we had this running joke or comment that was, this is terrible because the only people now that don't believe in the USA's national teams are like the citizens of the USA, right? And
yeah,
that means that their flag teams are going to be like super highly motivated to prove their own
yeah,
people wrong. Like every other team in the world, it's like if you get silver medal, it's like, yo,
yeah,
congratulations, you lost to American football.
yeah.
Damn.
Fair
Like
enough.
for them, they're like, it has to be gold and it has to be by 30.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, as well, like kind of.
It's
Who,
just, it's a
who
different
knew what he was doing when he
mentality.
made that quote that got
Like,
thrown
of
in
course,
mind?
like
Like, absolutely.
he absolutely did. But like at the same time, like Tyreek Hill gives him that platform by like, you know, basically calling him out. So
Yeah, yeah. But that is, I think that's something, that that pressure is something that they kind of have to deal with, and it's something that for us guys who kind of work at the highest level is kind of that kind of pressure that we put ourselves under as well. I'm very kind of conscious of when I go into these tournaments. My goal is always I want to officiate a gold medal game. That is objectively, that is what I go in with, an expectation of myself that I want to work a gold medal game. And the problem with having that, just as it is for the US players going in with an expectation that they're going to win, there is only one way from that expectation. If you can't exceed it, the only things that can happen are you either meet your expectation or you fail. Basically,
yeah.
that is immense amount of kind of mental load to be carrying throughout a tournament. I think I spent the first 3.5 days just never being 100%, never 100% enjoying myself, because there was always this kind of niggly bit that like, don't screw up, don't screw up, don't screw up, don't screw up, and it's just running over and over in your head, and that and I think the first game where I truly 100% just enjoyed myself was we found out, I found out that I was going to be refereeing the women's gold medal game at sort of lunchtime on the third day. So still had a couple of games in the afternoon. And the first time that I kind of actually was just able to be relaxed fully and enjoy my officiating was in that afternoon, because prior to that, I was just so tense the entire time. You just don't want to screw up. You just don't want to make a mistake. And, obviously we talked about kind of that contrast between playing and officiating. And, I think with playing, though, those individual mistakes happen and obviously they mean something, but at the end of the day, your success is measured primarily on how many games are you winning. There can be whatever happens in the course of those kind of games. The only thing that really matters at the end of the day is that final score. Did you get that W? And if you did, we can work on all the rest. Whereas with us, it is every single one of those individual plays and those individual calls. They all mean something for us. They all mean something of like, is that going to be the difference between me working that gold medal game or not working that gold medal game? And that's probably, I think from a mental perspective, why it can be so draining for us, because it's just such an intense environment, and it really, really was magnified with this tournament, especially with everything that's happening in the league, the announcement about 2028 and all that kind of stuff, and the visibility being put on the sport now. That absolute necessity for us to be perfect just grows and grows and grows and grows and grows.
So how does that even work? Like, so is there like an observer at every game
So
observing the four officials, or are you guys like observing each other, or
um,
like how, like, because obviously like you perform well through the tournament, you're
yeah,
rewarded with medal games, right?
yeah.
So like how does that?
So there's normally a small team of kind of people who will be officiating, but then also when they're off, they'll kind of watch games, try and watch as many. It's not every game that we're being observed. I think that would be The dream would be moving forwards would be that every game has like some sort of someone there, and because that's if you look at stuff like soccer and rugby or whatever, they do essentially have someone who is attached to every game as officiating kind of review or whatever, and every game
6
kind of
pitches, 6 live streams. It can be done.
well, this is the thing. Like, we are, and something we can talk about as well is, that kind of review process that's ongoing at the moment for the World Championships. But the problem with kind of how flag is organised, what are all these tournaments is, it's not like you have one game, then a break, for a couple of days, then another game where you can have that time to do a proper review kind of process. And so it's more a case of each crew getting a certain amount of their games watched, and then the powers that be coming together and kind of having those conversations. I've been involved in those conversations before at different kind of tournaments, so I know kind of how they kind of work and what kind of has to go into that. So it's also difficult though because of the way that kind of process happens, and because it's not every game that you're being watched. You never know when you've got someone observing you. So you can have a game that you think is gonna, be you can't ever have a game off. And not that you would have a game off, but you can't ever feel like, all right, I can just turn it down a little bit. I think the example that I think of from the tournament, from the Worlds, on day one, we had in our schedule we had Denmark against Ireland, and looking at it beforehand, that was kind of one where we thought, all right, so this probably won't be a close game based on previous kind of form or whatever. So this is an opportunity for us to try different positions, try and develop each other a little bit. I primarily work referee, but I don't want to just say I'm the referee on the crew and just let myself, do it all. I want to give the other guys an opportunity to develop and try and new things. And we kind of circled this game and we did it, and it turned out it was a one-score game.
It was so close. It was so close.
And like, full credit to the Irish guys for
They were full beans on that. I could not
and we were shocked, and I was doing down judge, and the reason I was doing that was because we had our referee. She was doing her first ever game at this level at referee, so I kind of and I was kind of half wanting to keep a little eye on her and make sure that everything was okay. But then as soon as you start kind of not 100% being focused on your job, that's when things start happening. It's just
in your zone, right?
Yeah, and we had a terrible game, and it was like we just calls just didn't quite work. The sort of mechanics between us felt a little bit kind of clunky, and we got to the end of it, and of course that was one of the games that we were being observed on, and we went through a somewhat kind of brutal feedback sort of session, and I am very kind of, I respond well to kind of no BS kind of feedback. I like that. I like being told this was bad, this was bad, this was okay, and like that is a, because I like having very clear, actionable kind of points to improve in my officiating. I will take that and I say, right. And then for some people that can be quite intense and quite kind of intimidating. So, we had this very kind of full on sort of feedback session after with the official who'd been observing us. And then I kind of had to pick the guys up a little bit, because I think everyone kind of felt a little bit kind of down after that.
But yeah, we know.
Yeah. And the thing is as well, like, yeah, you get off the field, like we know, the instant you get off the field, was that a good game or was that a bad game? And
so
I spoke about the women's final, about coming off the field and just thinking that was amazing. And I came off the field for this Ireland Denmark game, like we had an awful game, and I knew it straight away. I didn't need to be told that, but it was just kind of have to go through the process of it.
So here's one, and it's not necessarily related to the Worlds. It's just like a general kind of refereeing question, and everyone will know, right? Everyone will have done this at any level, whether they're at Winter League, Flag in New Year, BAFA Leagues, finals, refereeing abroad. If you make a shit call, right, and in the moment you're like, bang, like call made, done, penalty enforced, move on, touchdown, no touchdown, whatever, catch, no catch, whatever. 5 minutes later, at the end of the game, you're kind of thinking about it like, have I been wrong? I felt right, but I think I was wrong. How do you handle that? And what would you say to like Because I think that's what puts a lot of people off, right?
Yeah,
Like at league level, is they
absolutely.
don't want to referee, and it's not that they necessarily don't know the rules or anything, even though they'll say that, like, oh, I don't know the rules. But what they're actually afraid of, and I'm not immune to it either, is I don't want to make a shit call in a big game.
Absolutely.
So if, and I'm aware that I've made shit calls in games before, and I think anyone who says they haven't either doesn't referee often enough
Yeah,
or is a liar. So like, but how do you say you make a shit call in the first half? How do you like? Do you just like have to? Do you have like techniques for like just ignoring it until the game's over, or
absolutely. Like, I think that's something that it's something that I personally less so now, but used to struggle with a lot. And it's not so much you don't necessarily. It's not so much you know it's a shit call immediately, but it's there will be ones where you're like, I don't know, like, I mean, like, and like you'll call it, and then it'll just start playing, and it'll just start playing, and it'll just start playing, and it can. If the problem is, you can just end up with that in this spiral of bad calls breeding more bad calls because you just get in this
because you're
in
thinking
this
about
loop.
that and you're not
Yeah,
thinking about this, and then
exactly, and like I think it is one of the things that I said to one of the other officials after this Ireland game is no one died and the right team won. And I mean, yes, there might have, and it's being able to have that kind of grounding with it. And yes, there were some poor decisions in the meantime, and we will work on fixing those. But it wasn't anything earth-shatteringly bad, and just being able to reset from those. And I think it's probably exactly the same as players have when something goes wrong for them, and they drop a pass, they blow a coverage or whatever. That ability to kind of just take a breath and reset from it. I mean, one of the things that I did with my crew was, and this is something I took from rugby actually. I saw teams doing it at half time, and at critical moments in the game, they do breathing exercises, and you see them take 3 or 4 just deep breaths just as a grounding thing. And it's something that I encouraged the guys that I was officiating with to just kind of start using themselves a little bit, because you do have these very sort of hectic moments where you might have potentially made a bad call, it might have been a good call, you just don't know. And just kind of being able to ground yourselves in those moments is just so important, and just give you that ability to just reset and move on and just, kind of deliver it. I mean, the way I kind of treat these games is I don't treat it as a 40-minute game. I treat it as 8 sections of 5 minutes. Because if saying I need to be perfect for 5 minutes sounds a lot easier than be
it'd be
perfect for
great
40
for
minutes.
40.
Yeah, exactly. And I do exactly, and funnily enough, we mentioned my rugby officiating as well. I do exactly the same with rugby, where I break 80 minutes down into 10-minute sections and just say deliver for 10 minutes. Exactly the same with flag. I say deliver for 5 minutes. Give me this, and then once we're out of that 5 minutes is done. That is that we're out of that, park that, move on to the next one. Give me 5 more perfect minutes, and that is just the way I kind of get myself through these games, is by making it into these little chunks. And it means that once you've done one, you can forget about that, park it. Let's think about that after the game. Let's get rid of that one and just kind of work from there.
Kind of back to Worlds, but also on the subject of shit calls. There's like obviously the last thing anyone wants to do is shit calls late, right? And that is a, I don't know if you're familiar with it. That is a AFL meme that goes around every year, because traditionally speaking, AFL umpires make shit calls late, and teams score goals. So it's quite funny that there's this like kind of community around it. And in like, there's always been this rumor, not rumor, but like, there's always this thing in like ice hockey that in the NHL, when the playoffs roll around, referees swallow their whistles a bit, right? And they just let the players play. Same with the NFL.
Yeah.
I know that you would never tell me if I asked you outright, like, is that something that definitely happens? Or is it?
No, I will be. I will be. I can be very kind of
But
pragmatic.
like, does it, like, as you get towards quarterfinals, semifinals, medal matches, is it starting to come back to kind of what you mentioned earlier on about like the product and the entertainment value, and I don't want to be the one to decide this, so the marginal calls become even more marginal?
Being honest about it, like my attitude doesn't change based on the game and where we are in the competition or anything like that. But my attitude from game one is that I want to be locked in on these. Every call I make, I want to be 100% on. And we talk about like sort of bad calls or whatever, and I have kind of realized that the worst thing that we can do as officials, I think, is call something like a foul or whatever that isn't there. It's infinitely worse than us not calling something that perhaps was there. Because if we call something that wasn't there, we have inserted ourselves in the game by throwing a flag, by enforcing the penalty or whatever. And it's a very visceral, tangible kind of thing. If I'm referee, I have to stand there and make an announcement of the penalty and everything like that. And it is something that's so obvious. And I think there's a contrast with no calls, where perhaps we let something go that maybe should have been called, where that just isn't quite the same, doesn't quite have the same impact, and it doesn't piss people off in the same way that perhaps calling something that isn't there completely does. And so, I have this attitude: if I am going to call something,
It better be there.
It 100% should be there. And there's almost like there's a little bit of a selfish kind of side to this as well, in that I've been around a while. I know the game a little bit in terms of how these sort of games get reviewed and whatever. And it is infinitely easier in a review process to defend a no call than it is to defend an incorrect call, where you threw the flag and you shouldn't have.
Okay. Yeah.
Because you can talk about angle, you can talk about perspective, you can talk about, did that contact actually have that much impact from my side? It didn't, if you haven't called something. Whereas if you have called something, you better be able to go through
dissect what happened. Yeah.
That is what happened. And that is so part of it is about making sure that the game, we're allowing the game to flow and everything. And then part of it is that sort of selfish aspect, where I know what if I have to look back at these calls and not defend but kind of, or justify but kind of them afterwards, I want to be able to do that in the best kind of possible way. And there's a bit of sort of self-preservation that kind of feeds into that as well.
So yeah, you mentioned there, obviously there's the review process. I know that's still ongoing, and that you're still kind of part of it.
The big challenge is that with Limerick last year, we had 48 games streamed, because we only had 2 fields streamed in Limerick. So it was, a project that didn't last that long. For the Worlds this year, we have 196 games, I think, streamed.
Missing one important one.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
Missing one.
I think there are 2 games that
I think there's 2 on that field that got missed.
And there's a half missing from a different game as well. But other than that, every game is there. And it means that this kind of review process that we have is an absolute behemoth of a task. And we've got a team of, I think it's like 7 or 8 of us around the world who are kind of dealing with it. And it is something that's, an ongoing kind of project. My highlight, and I know that you're something of a sports kind of stat kind of guy.
I'm a stat guy.
Yeah, so I got one of my colleagues from Canada, Scott, I thought I was good at Excel, but he's absolutely superb at it. And he is taking every review that we do and pulling it all into a spreadsheet. So we've got a database of every foul that's been called in the World Championships. And actually, earlier this evening, he sent me a pie chart that broke down, and obviously we're on camera, that breaks down every call that was made within the tournament, and breaks it down by the type of call that was being made, what percentage of fouls was called at that. So I can tell you that of all the flags thrown in the games that have been reviewed so far, 32.6% of them were for illegal contact defense. So we've got these really kind of good sort of metrics to kind of measure stuff, and we're really kind of developing stuff, and it's really, really good because it means that we can then, moving forward, kind of prioritize what we want to focus on in training, because we know these are the calls that are being made the most often and stuff like that. So we've got some really good kind of insights coming out of this review stuff that we're doing, and it's just, it's a big task. It basically is a full-time job, which isn't my full-time job, but kind of consumes a huge amount of my time to do. But it's really good, and having the level of coverage that we had for the Worlds this year was on a completely different level from what we've had at any other tournament previously. And you probably know that, as someone who will have followed it and obviously reports on it,
consumed the content.
Exactly. And it's absolutely amazing that we've got all of this. Obviously, it is a little bit daunting when you've got 196 games, 195 games to review, but it's only a good thing.
It is actually, yeah. The coverage worldwide was obviously nothing that we've ever come across. The question, the pub quiz question of can you guess which of the graphics that we put out achieved the most reach and the most views? The schedule.
Yeah.
The schedule. Because it had every team on it, on every pitch. So people were that thing, those things went properly global, which is very strange for a bunch of guys in their spare rooms, But yeah, the schedule gets people going. So you're obviously grading each other and grading the officials that were there. And I get, like you say, you're kind of the foul called. I'm guessing you're doing call, no call.
Yeah, so we
marginal.
We rank
ticky tacky.
Yeah, exactly. Every decision within a game, and these reviews can go to hundreds, 100. I think my longest is 120 rows. Every decision gets graded. If it's a judgment call, was it a correct judgment or an incorrect judgment? If it's mechanics, was it correct mechanics? Was it incorrect mechanics? If it's a foul, was it correctly called? Was it correctly not called? Was it a marginal call, so it was called, but we probably shouldn't have called it? Or was it incorrectly called? And every foul and every situation is being graded.
So you go through all of those streams and all of those calls for all of those refs. Do you then have to obviously you then have to talk to every ref individually?
Yeah, so we
share as part of that review process, and they get their score grade.
So you get a review sheet of the game, and it's brutal because it's just time stamped and said 18
good call, bad call.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you literally get a timestamp of this is good, this is good, this is shit, this is good, this is good, this is good. And it is quite a sort of not cutthroat, but sort of challenging kind of sort of process from that side of things. But and then that also, what we have started to look at for this tournament, which we hadn't done previously, is as well as doing these kind of reviews, is then based off these reviews, we're grading officials. So, and the way it kind of works is that everyone starts on 100 because we presume that every official is going to have a perfect game.
So it's like deductibles.
Yeah, it's not. You start on 0 and you work your way out. Yeah, because we want to work with the assumption that until proven otherwise, every official is going to deliver a perfect game, which is why we say we start 100 and then you go down from there based on incorrect calls, incorrect mechanics, yada yada yada.
Yeah. Prayers up for the last 3 minutes of GB versus Spain. That will have been a tough review.
Yeah, I funnily enough, I did the review for that game. And it was a challenging one. I think the guys were very kind of like I said, when you've had a shit game.
Yeah,
they were very,
knew, and I did feel bad for them.
There's no point.
You can't kill them for it because they know.
Yeah, there's no point hammering someone too much about kind of something like that, because we are very much our own worst critics. And stuff does go wrong, and there but for the grace of God go, the rest of us, as it were, almost like, I could easily be in a situation where something like that could happen and you don't realize at the time, and then you look back and, I have games like that where stuff's gone wrong and I look back at it and I just think, how did that happen? Like, how did I let that happen? There's situations, maybe not perhaps on that level, but situations from within the tournament where I've gone back and watched my games and thought, what happened there?
What am I doing?
Absolutely, and it is tricky, and you do these, sort of reviews and these grading kind of processes, and you distill something that is as complicated as it is difficult to take something that's as complicated as officiating a game of flag is, and trying to distill it down to a single number and a score or whatever.
Right, and it's like split second decision making,
Yeah,
and I'm sure
absolutely.
like you look at club teams now, like almost everyone's filming, right? Like it used to be the preserve of like a couple of teams in the Premiership would record their games. Now you're seeing teams up and down the entire league with like VO cams or GoPros or even just someone holding a camera on the sideline. Like,
Absolutely.
and I mean, I've watched enough All Cats film back to like just look at stuff and be like, what am I doing? Like, or what, or occasionally like looking at the entire defense, just being like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
So like, it's very easy as a ref crew. They are just unfortunate because that was the situation we were talking about before with a rubbish call. Like, that was a rubbish call as time expired that like could have had a material impact in the final result and therefore ranking points and all that. Like, that is the shittiest cauldron.
Yeah, no,
That
absolutely.
is the worst thing you can have
And
in your cooking
I
pot.
think
And
the
I think they
thing that,
knew, and I don't like, they weren't doing anything. They're unfortunate that it's at a high profile event, right?
no, exactly.
And I don't want to bash them.
No,
It's just the one that comes to head because obviously
yeah,
that's the
yeah,
one that we were interested in.
yeah. Of course, and I think it's the other thing is, and I am a great believer in the fact that the universe is always out to screw us over, and I mean,
That
no
might be the
great,
next podcast t-shirt.
no greater proof than if that play happened in the middle of the first half. Yeah, all right, it would have been a controversial moment, but it wouldn't have anywhere near the level
Time
of
pressure. Like, it's
rigmarole
the
around it in
urgency.
the same way as it does when it happens on the, sort of
Literal last play of the
the
game.
literal last play. I mean, they need to send Liam a bouquet of flowers or God knows what to do, because after what him doing that saved a lot of, as you said, of it actually tangibly changing the result. So it did that did.
I
I
mean,
think
the glorious thing about it is it did give us that moment.
it did.
Like, Liam and I have spoken about this both on
Yeah,
air,
I
like, and
remember
off air.
talking about
Like,
it.
as a blitzer, and like Liam and I chat about it a lot. Like, into the veins,
Yeah, exactly. And
walk off sack in a World
yeah,
Championships.
absolutely. But it is. But the guys, they bounced back from that, and there were guys on
Yeah, of
that
course.
crew and there's guys on that crew who I've worked with for a long time and know very, very well, and and we talked about being able to bounce back from that, and those guys did bounce back from that. So I think it is, stuff like that happens, and it's not ideal, and it shouldn't happen, but it does happen.
But it does.
And it's the ability to kind of bounce back from that is so sort of important.
So, bouncing back, moving on. Flag football has European Championships. It has a World Games. It will have a World Championships in 2 years' time. It'll have an Olympics in 4 more years. Talk to me. What do you see in like the future of officiating flag football at an international level, both in the short term and the long term?
Yeah, I mean, like, the good thing is that IFAF have been very kind of open with the process for how it's going to kind of develop, and they want to kind of take the officiating side of things a little bit more kind of seriously as well. So I think one of the ideas that they've talked about is moving back to that kind of system that I talked about for my first tournament, which was just as opposed to everyone bringing 2 officials, which means you can get quite a varying level between different countries, is just trying to develop a kind of core international, not panel, but group that they're kind of drawing from. to be able to continue to deliver that kind of consistent standard. I know for the World Games, there's going to be 12 officials at that, which will be, and what they've also said for the World Games is they've committed to a 50-50 split of male and female officials, which I think is very important as well. I mean, like, since I last came on the show, I've had my daughter, and I mean, like, I think having role models throughout sport, not just as players, but in officiating positions, in coaching positions, is so important for them. I want her to be able to think that she can do whatever she wants to do within this sport, be it playing, be it officiating, be it coaching, whatever. So I think that's a really good commitment they've made to help drive that kind of 50-50 sort of split. So, and then also they've also committed to a certain amount of Chinese officials for the World Games as well, to kind of leave a bit of a legacy there as well. So there's quite a small window for the for officials to be able to get onto that kind of list. So it's, I don't know if I'm going to go or not. I don't know if I'm quite, like there's maybe 5 or 6 of us fighting out for a limited number of slots, and it does get a little bit competitive, and it's weird because I'm in competition with people who I consider my very, very good friends. And that is quite a hard sort of thing to deal with because, we all know each other so well. We all get on so well. But at the end of the day, we all want to go and we all want to be the one who's ranked up there. So you kind of have to, it's a difficult thing to kind of
Like the
balance.
bonus squad, isn't it? Like, it's not dissimilar to kind of, we spoke to Ollie at length about being picked for the golds and how you're really happy for everyone around you, but you're also like, I also have to knock some of you out in order
Yeah.
to
Yeah. And
to make
it's
to make the squad.
exactly the
So
same.
similar, again, like we said right at the start, similar vibes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, it's a challenge, especially as the pool starts narrowing down and down and down and down, and the amount, the sort of spaces available, and it becomes this very kind of competitive kind of environment where we want to deliver the best games, but we also want to do for ourselves personally as well. And it's difficult because I absolutely hate to think, and I wouldn't think this, but there's a little bit in your brain that thinks, you know, would I have done a better job there? Or like, when, like, for example, when you're watching games back or whatever, you think, would I do better there? And like, you don't want to measure yourself constantly against your peers, but it's kind of hard not to do that when it becomes more and more sort of
When you're being
competitive.
graded and
Yeah,
and when
exactly.
you're being compared, it's hard not to compare with yourself.
Exactly. And that is something that we, you know, kind of have to deal with. And, that's where, and as we get closer and closer and closer to 2028, that's become a bigger and bigger thing. I mean, like, my personal goal is I would, want to be on that field when we get to Los Angeles. And based on the progression that I've made over the last 10 years or whatever of working international football, that's, something that I would think is fully achievable for me. But it's just so difficult as it becomes that more intense environment that, you're just kind of having to keep working, and all those kind of, it becomes so marginal, the difference between officials as well. And it's, especially if you're doing grading and where you're getting a number at the end of it, like it could be like 0.5% or something stupid, isn't it? Like, so that is kind of the challenge that we have. But it's very exciting. I think next year, we've obviously got the Worlds, we've got a Euros as well, so that's a good opportunity to kind of hopefully give as many officials the opportunity to try this as well. We've been very lucky that we've also had like the Youth Euros as well this year and last year, which has given the opportunity for some guys to get some international experience. And I am very conscious of the fact that I will improve the most if I'm being pushed by people coming up the other way. it can be very easy to be complacent if you are at a level and you're not being challenged at that level. And I think it's really, really important that there are people pushing to be at that top step, to make sure that the guys who perhaps are currently at that top step are putting that work in and driving themselves to improve as well. So that's an advert as well to start for anyone who's thinking about starting officiating. Then please do, because I want to be sort of pushed and driven, and I don't want to think that like it's automatic for me, because it shouldn't be, and that's not going to give the best officiating from anyone if they just think, oh, I'll get there by default or whatever.
Yeah.
I want to think I need to work at this, and I need to be the best official I can be to get to where I want to get to.
Yeah. One last question before we wrap up. Your Instagram series, Anatomy of a Call, went much more successfully than I think you thought would happen. You thought would, and I felt vindicated when it popped off. But what was the so first off, where can people find you on Instagram? And second, what was like the thought process behind starting up?
I mean, so if you do want to find me on Instagram, I'm at JedZBL. I came back from the World Championships and I wanted to start. I work in marketing, so social kind of media is something I'm very kind of aware of, and I wanted to start doing something kind of officiating sort of focused, just because I think there's a certain gap in the market there. And the reason I started doing the videos was because I know that the algorithm loves video content. So
Yeah, it is what it is.
to put it very kind of simply, and I think it was also, that's the cynical answer, but I think I think people love having something easily digestible and accessible from a rules perspective. So it was something that I was keen to do, was to give people, just something that could hopefully teach them a little bit about the rules. Obviously I adore officiating. I love rules. I love getting stuck into that kind of nitty gritty kind of stuff. And I wanted to just find kind of a medium for spreading that with the world and making it a little bit more kind of accessible for people. And that's why I started. And tying into the fantastic coverage we had from the Flag Worlds, I've got so many of my games and so many calls that I can just go and find and pull and talk about. And I remember, it's funny, you talk about all these games, and I was pulling those clips. I think I've done 3 or 4 of the videos now, and I was pulling those clips from memory. I was like, oh yeah, I remember in this game there was a really interesting situation, I'm gonna go and grab that or whatever. So it was just giving an opportunity to kind of spread that a little bit with people and help them hopefully learn something. And especially, for example, how officiating is here, where it's mainly driven by team officials and people who, some might be very confident, some might not be 100%, and they, sometimes you just need that little bit of guidance. And I wanted to be able to offer, whatever I could with that. So thank you very much for the promotion of it. I think it was great to see. It was really, really encouraging for me to see the level of kind of engagement that kind of content gets, that there is an appetite for people to learn more about the rules and more about officiating and how they can be better officials. So it was, it was absolutely fantastic to see.
Good. I will look forward to the next one.
And of course, if anyone has calls that they want to submit, video that they want to submit, then my inbox is always open, because I would love to not just talk about myself, but if people want stuff analyzed, then I'm always here.
That could be fun. Yeah, cool. Well, we'll call it there. We've done a lot of digging into that one. Yeah, I'll just say, Jed, thank you very much for coming on, and offering your kind of perspective of the worlds and officiating in general. I do really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
No worries. And yes, keep an eye on the Facebook and Instagram later this week. There's a couple of good things coming. One of them is that there's a holiday on Thursday, which bleeds into shopping madness over the weekend. One of our partners is going to be sharing something pretty cool. So keep an eye out for that. Get yourself a bargain on team merch, basically. And what else have I got? Coming soon. I wrote an Excel formula to derive the Women's Flag Football League power rankings, which I might drop later this week. So keep an eye out. And our first ever power rankings for the Women's Flag Football League will drop as we get ready for week 3 at the beginning of December, where there's some absolute crackers. We'll be back for a preview. But thank you everyone for joining us. That is the way we HNC it.